excited to be welcoming Gail to the stage today. Gail is the Head of Strategic Partnerships for the Cornwall Space Cluster and coordinates the National Space Ecosystem Cluster Group, working closely with Satellite Applications Catapult and the UK Space Agency. Gail has an electromechanical engineering degree and has worked in the private sector in R&D for 15 years and in economic development and business support for the last 10. She works really closely with over 500 of the most innovative businesses in the region, and she's now focused on securing investment for Cornwall Space Cluster members, identifying potential R&B collaborations and ensuring Cornwall's capabilities are recognised nationally and internationally. She's done some amazing work. Please welcome Gail to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to come and engage people with not only space. I may be dipping around in a few different places, just checking at the back everyone can hear and see. I'm going to come out that bright light because that's a bit heady, and I'll bring the clicker with me. I'll go back and get the clicker first. So thanks for that introduction, Nikki. My job really this afternoon, in the short space that we've got, is to, I guess, whet your appetite a little bit about some of the opportunities that are coming in some of the most high-tech sectors. Space is growing really quickly. I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what's happening nationally and globally, and then bring it back to what's happening in Cornwall and across the southwest and the UK. So in terms of just the sector as a whole, who's pretty space literate? Who knows what's happening in space? 2 or 3 or 4. Great. Well, if you can bear with me, and we'll take the rest of the audience through some of the headlines. So within the UK, space sector is worth about 19 billion, growing quickly. Not really, a patch on what's happening in the States where, they have a £75 billion investment just out of US government. So huge opportunity globally, but we are really now motoring ahead in this country. You can see there lots of employees growing, and I would argue that's nearer to 3,500 companies. And the reason being, 1,700 companies would put on paper, I work in the space sector. Many people work in and around the space sector, but may not define themselves in that way. So I think it's actually closer to 3,500 from the work that I get involved in. For those of you that are interested in maybe either selling products and services into this sector, or if you're looking to start a business and thinking, well, I hadn't really thought about this as an opportunity, hopefully we're going to demystify it a little bit, but also give you some resources to check out, some places you might want to hang out, some people you might want to meet. Within the UK in particular, the national strategy, if you like, is being set really by these 2 documents. One is the National Space Strategy that's been out there for 3 years now, but also the Industrial Plan. And that really punches out the priority areas for growth in this sector. So I was going to just really tease out each of those 5 priorities and just kind of bring those to life for people. Just as a show of hands, and for those that are space literate, don't answer this because it'll spoil it for everyone else. Just to show on the bottom left there, some of the stuff that's happening that may be a little bit more out there, a little bit more ooh. One of the things that's really interesting and started off as an academic piece, but is becoming a really interesting roundtable conversation at the moment is space is, the sun's pretty close. It's closer than it is here. Abundant power, abundant energy. Why don't we just gather all that space, solar, and beam it back down to Earth? Now, bear with the fact that if you get that wrong, you wipe out an entire continent. But just as a sort of guesswork, there's an example there of the Solaris system. If you're familiar with it, like I said, don't guess. But what sort of scale do you think that satellite is that might need to gather the sun's data and beam it back down? How big do you think that wingspan is? Any guesses? Don't be shy. 100 foot. Good guess. 500 metres, getting a bit bigger. It's bigger still. That's a 1.7 kilometre array that's being developed. So some really large-scale stuff, as you might expect from this sector. I said I'd talk about some of the areas that are particular areas of focus. Won't necessarily be language that people are familiar with. I wasn't. I came to this sector 7 years ago knowing nothing at all about space or aerospace. But there are some eye-watering figures in here, and I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a flavour of that today. Just to give you a sense of scale, when we're talking about space, we're really talking about satellites. There are, ish, 12,000 satellites in orbit at the moment. Over half of those are SpaceX's fleet, the Starlink fleet. Planet Labs, people like that are putting up 500 at a time. But of that 12,000, about 3,500 of those are knackered. They no longer function, they've been up there for too long, they are effectively kaput. However, that gives us a great opportunity. And you can see here the in-orbit service, assembly and manufacture is really one of those big trends. How do we go and repurpose those vehicles? Can we go back and fill them back up? Maybe they just run out of fuel. Maybe their solar panels are damaged, we could replenish them. Or do we actually take the old aluminium and bits and bobs and repurpose them into new infrastructure? So there's some interesting work that Space Forge and others are doing around that. There is a sad figure in terms of, obviously things get bashed into, space debris gets created. There are, I think at last count, something like 130 million pieces of space debris. 30,000 of those are bigger than my hand and can actually be tracked and attributed back to the people that put it there. Huge job to clean that up. But again, great opportunity to go and actually, as we're cleaning up, use that stuff. And that really links back to some of the work that we're doing here in Cornwall. You know, we're focusing a lot about launching new satellites, but actually that need will diminish somewhat by the fact that we will be harvesting resources from the moon. We will be mining asteroids. We will be able to build stuff in space. And if you take things like the pharmaceutical industry, the semiconductor industry, take things like crystal manufacture, happens in a lab here, it's good enough. Happens in space, it's almost 100% perfect. So actually there's an opportunity to learn a lot about how we could manufacture things very differently and completely differently to what we've been used to. Position, navigation and timing, PNT, not language that we necessarily bump into, but things I suspect most of us in this room will have interacted with that half a dozen times today. So whether people think they're involved in space or use space tech, yes, you do, you may not realise it. But we follow our blue dots around our GPS systems and our sat-navs. Every time you buy something, that credit card transaction has a timestamp on it. That's been relayed by a satellite. Every time you buy something off Amazon, it's probably being fulfilled with some sort of logistics via satellite. Really important at the moment, given the sad state of affairs that we have in conflicts around the world at the moment, that it's not only we know where stuff is, but we need to know when it was there. Is it still there? Has it moved? Is it doing something troublesome? The thing that we focus on in the Cornwall Space Cluster is more the space data that we get back from these satellites, particularly because we want to use those for terrestrial applications. So, damage your sign. Earth observation satellites are the things that we see probably most often, you know, the weather satellites, the things that we might see on Google Earth, the images that we might see in the news from, you know, Big Brother. It's not eyes in the skies, it's eyes in orbit. Satcoms, again, we rely on that heavily in terms of broadband infrastructure, mobile comms. Increasingly in the defence sector, as I was just mentioning, it is really the thing that is providing a huge focus around intelligence and surveillance and reconnaissance ops. And space domain awareness, which each satellite needs to know where it is in relation to the rest of the universe. And importantly, where it is in relation to other satellites, ideally. So if it's in a collision path, it can get out of the way. And there are an eye-watering number of movements of satellites every day. But actually, the bigger picture is that space domain awareness. How do we actually see what all of these satellites are doing? What are all those 12,000 things doing? Some of them are way up. You know, the geostationary satellites are effectively in a static position. The Earth rotates. They take an image, therefore, of that, you know, the Earth every 24 hours. You've got the low Earth orbit stuff that may be only 100, 200 kilometres up, that is going around with the Earth. So that's really looking at one spot on the Earth all the time. But we need to understand what's happening across the whole environment. So space domain awareness is really important. So if you're looking at businesses in things like encryption, propulsion, data and comms, really key opportunities for growth here. I said there are approximately 12,000 satellites up there at the moment. By 2030, just to give you a feel, 7 years ago there were 1,400. So that's been quite a fast growth. 2030, we think around 60,000 satellites. Now, some of those are credit card sized, some of them are, you know, substantially bigger, but 60,000 satellites. Whilst I'm here talking today about space, I also look after the aerospace part of the community. And in a related sense, there is only one drone in space, but there are going to be more. But from an aerospace application, 900,000 drones are predicted to be flying above our skies. These are huge opportunities for people who are developing sensors and comms and anything that is around sort of remote sensing. So I'm going to whistle-stop through some of the ways that you might want to engage with this sector if you're not already, or you're interested, or you have friends and family who you thought might be interested, or colleagues. But it is a whistle-stop, so please do come and find me later. I'll be out in the foyer there for the detail, because I haven't got time to do that justice in the 20 minutes or so that we have left. If you're not already and you're interested, do check out the Space Enterprise community. This is like the Space LinkedIn. It's not LinkedIn, but it's kind of wannabe Space LinkedIn, where effectively the community, it's free. You just register your email address, set yourself a little 2-sentence profile up. But effectively, it's where the national community comes together to share things like events that are going on, any resources, or the strategy documents, people who have challenges, people who have jobs, people who have contracts that you might want to set up a business around to cater for. If you are looking to employ people, or you're looking for a job yourself, spacecareers.uk, again, space-focused part. So these are all space-specific. You can obviously go on broader platforms and seek out space jobs. The satellite applications catapult are very key in terms of providing support and guidance in this sector. They've got something called the Space Capabilities Catalogue. If you want a particular product or service, then all of the companies that are operating in this sector, somewhere between that 1,700 and 3,500, my guess, will be on that forum there. So if you're actually looking for something, or you're looking to sell something, you might want to go and find potential buyers. Check that one out. Space Training Catalogue and the Spacecraft Competencies Framework have been developed by the Space Skills Alliance. Again, lots of detail about the sorts of skills that might be needed, the training programmes. If you want to take a qualification in this area, that's all available through those sites. I'm going to share these links. I've actually put them as links in the slide deck so that when they come out, you can kind of click on these and go straight to them. I mentioned the Satellite Applications Catapult. They work very closely with the UK Space Agency. Half of my role is funded by the UK Space Agency. The other half is funded by Shared Prosperity Fund through Cornwall Council. So it's a regional national partnership. I cannot express enough how many different sectors I've worked in and around, that there is so much resource and support and funding in this sector at the moment. You may not see this locally, but my job is to try and illustrate the fact that you can connect with that nationally. And that's because it's one of the highest growth, highest skilled sectors there is. So there are areas here that you can see on the screen of particular areas of interest. But again, connecting in through that Space Enterprise platform, these guys are regularly putting out support programmes. They've just put out a £33 million National Space Innovation Programme. It's not space specific. So if you're doing things around tech, AI, there'll be some sort of application that may be usable in space, but it may also be used in the mining sector or in the automotive sector. So don't worry too much about thinking about this as only exclusively for space, because it's not. I speak to a lot of people who tend to think space is sort of some magic machines and devices. It's metal boxes, it's PCBs, it's wires. We just wrap it up in a gold foil wrapper. Hence why I have the gold foil shoes on. If you are interested in finding out what's more happening region, just a quick show of hands, who is not from the southwest? Thank you. Who is not from Cornwall? Okay, so I'll focus more on what's happening locally then. So in terms of what's happening in Cornwall, Cornwall Space Cluster, like I said at the beginning of this is us out at one of the, you recognise yourself there, Simon, but us out at one of the events that we go to. We are effectively a community of 130 organisations who, to a greater or lesser extent, are servicing the space and aerospace sectors. Hardware, software, all sorts. More than half of those companies are in what we call the downstream, the software, the satellite application side of it. So they're using things to, say, help farmers manage their crop yields and identify traffic flow problems, which is obviously in Cornwall quite an interesting one over the summer. A small number are in the upstream, all the stuff that we were just talking about there, the satellite side of it. But we tend to go out and we recognise that businesses who are a little bit smaller, newer, maybe new to the sector, may not have a BD team, they may not have a marketing team, they might be 4 people and they're doing every job they can think of themselves. So we go out as a collective and we go out and we share what our capabilities are. And what's really been nice for me to see is that a lot of these businesses know about all the other businesses. So if you speak to one of them, they'll pretty much have a good feel for the other 130-ish. depending which field they're in to a greater or lesser extent. I should know about all of them. So if you do have anyone that you want to connect with in this sort of world, come and talk to me. In terms of, I mentioned there we've got 130 organisations, but there's also local partners such as the Space Agency and the Met Office and people that we work with, some academic partners. We've got a strategy which actually says we will focus on creating job opportunities for people and business growth opportunities, because we want this sector to grow. We want these opportunities for our young people and for people pivoting into the space sector to be seen as really accessible and easy to do. My job is to create another £150 million worth of value in this area. Since we started, we're up to 100 million. So still some way to go by 2030. But as we said, if there's going to be 60,000 satellites floating around, there's some opportunities here for people to get involved. You'll probably have seen, if you've been through the foyer, there's a big yellow sort of map version of this outside. This just gives you a feel of the fact that these businesses are all over the place. You know, they're dotted all over Cornwall. They're not all located in one area. They're large and they're small. The majority are sub-10 FTE businesses. They are not large-scale businesses, hence why we're all working together. But they are clusters around some of our assets. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what they are for those that are interested. So we've got a base up at Newquay and a base down at Goonhilly. Some of you will be very familiar, if you're from Cornwall then, that we have a spaceport, and we saw the first launch from that last January. Surrounding that is the Centre for Space Technologies, which is actually a combination of facilities ultimately. So as you're looking on your right, the black building there is our operations facility. So we've got companies like Avanti Communications who are actually controlling their satellite fleet from that building 4 miles up the road. And on the left is our integration facility, which currently has the 70-foot rocket that Virgin Orbit attempted to launch. Not the actual one, because that is somewhere, sadly, at the bottom of the sea near the Canaries. But the equivalent rocket is in the integration facility to demonstrate what that integration looks like, i.e., you develop a satellite, you make one, you've got to get it into the rocket. They're pretty fragile, and you've got to get it into space. So they've got to be robust enough to stand the radiation and the heat, but actually they're quite delicate little things. So you've got to have a facility to kind of care for them. In terms of Goonhilly, some of you will have heard of Goonhilly Earth Station or driven past the ground station there down on the Lizard. That was a BT site that's been privately taken over and is now being used to do a whole range of things, but they are the only non-space agency, i.e. private sector company, which is doing deep space comms. And by deep space, I mean Mars. They are controlling missions to Mars now. They were on the Artemis mission, which was the one that went up to the moon earlier this year and back end of last. You can see on here, and probably can't read because I'm not great with Japanese, but the top left part of that image is about the different space agencies that you know a Cornwall-based business is operating from. So that's one's for ISRO, which is the Indian Space Agency, JAXA, which is Japanese, NASA, European Space Agency. So, you know, the players in the world are being, the missions are being controlled locally from Goonhilly. And there's also some examples on the right-hand side there of some CubeSats. And for those that don't know, I'm going to kill this sign, I'm really sorry. CubeSats are effectively 10 centimetre cubes, and it's a way of standardising the way that satellites can kind of be brought together and launched into space. Ultimately, it's a bit of a faff if they're all different shapes and sizes. We are unusual in Cornwall in the fact that we have a value chain which is end-to-end. There are other clusters around the UK, because nobody has launch yet, although Scotland is now licensed for launch. We can make satellites, we can launch the satellites, we can control the satellites, and then we can get all that data back down and do good stuff. And we are really keen about using space for good, whether that's environmental good, societal good. There are lots of people out there that are using space for very, very bad. So we want to be on the front foot of that innovation. In terms of what we do in terms of support, if you are interested in working in this area, you can see there some of the things that we've talked about in terms of business support, funding support, making sure that you've got access to money, because that's what most people need when they're setting up a business. But increasingly, if you're kind of working in a different sector and you're going, well, this isn't relevant for me, it's interesting, but it's not relevant, don't be so sure, because somewhere there might be some tech and some IP that you're developing that absolutely has an application. So a lot of what we do is help businesses pivot into these sectors. And there's an example I'll give in a moment. Just a little overview about what's happening in the skills sector, particularly this is a tech group. Disappointingly, we look at some of the apprenticeships and what's happening with our apprentices, and you can see here electronics engineering, environmental science and maths, which you think might be quite useful, on the decline. However, if you look at our community and you say, what are the skills that you have in highest demand? At the top of that list is software and data. So great, we're in the right place. We're in the right room today. Loads of opportunities there to get involved in either employing or growing with those businesses. But I want really to draw your attention to the second number. Professional services, i.e. finance and law and HR and marketing and all the things that are needed to run a business. They are the second highest in demand from that community. It's not the engineers, it's not the scientists. Whilst they are very important, there are opportunities for all the businesses that you're creating to be part of those entities. We know there's a bit of a mismatch between software and data education and provision and demand at the moment, and we're working on that. So really the reason I'm here today is to try and say, well, actually, what we need to do is encourage people to pivot from other sectors, or for people who are maybe at later stages in their career to think about setting up a business and being an entrepreneur and getting into these sort of sectors. And that's how we'll create that sort of replacement labour force. I mentioned that there are other clusters around the UK. There are 15 space clusters, so there are 14 others of me dotted around the UK. If you are interested in engaging, or you have people that you work with that are interested in engaging with their local rep, any one of us can connect you with anyone else. I meet with these guys every week. We sit down formally every month to talk about collaboration, so that if there are things that you're going, I need this sort of a company, and they happen to be in Durham, then I'll connect you up through the North East Space Cluster. Across the southwest, whilst we have a Cornwall Space Cluster, if you're in Devon, there isn't a Devon Space Cluster, and I know that's sad. But we do have Space West, which is the Bristol and Bath area. But that bit in the middle has been a bit of a gap. So we've created recently the South West Space Partnership, which really enables everyone in the middle to get involved and come out on certain events. If you're in the top half of the Southwest, and Becky Huffey at Space West will be your contact. If you're in the bottom half, come and speak to me. Wherever you are, I'll try and help. In terms of what that community does, we talked a little bit about the fact that as a collective we're much stronger, so we give people the opportunity to go out to events. We'll pay for the stand, but actually people can use that to exhibit their wares. So we've got, for example, we're going out to Bremen in November. We have 21 different businesses coming with us, so we will be the Southwest Massive. But also we work with our partners in the UK Space Agency and others to say, actually, there's a UK presence here, and actually globally, whether we like it or not, UK is tiny. We don't want to confuse them with 15 bits, so we just go out as the UK. But again, the equivalent of the map that's out the front there, this is the Southwest list of businesses if you want to kind of engage with any of those. I was asked to kind of have a bit of a reflect on a founder's story, somebody that sort of ended up getting into space, whether they intended to or not. Sadly, Diego, who is top left on your image, can't be here because he's bombing around the world. So I'm going to kind of present his story, if you like. And one to watch, I think, if you've got a tech interest or an AI interest. So Diego Favarolo is Argentinian. He set up his first business when he was 18, back in 1999. Aged him. And he set that up. It was a recruitment tech business. Grew that over sort of 12, 13 years. And is still now, Boomerang, it's still now one of the top 10 tech companies in Latin America. So he exited that in 2012. And he thought, I'll move on to the next one. Bored now. So he set up a company on the back of a NASA competition. He was not a space person. And NASA basically put out a challenge that says, can you do a 3D printed rocket engine? And everyone went, no. And a few people went, I'll give it a go. Diego gave it a go. He won that competition. Other people that gave it a go were Musk, names that we are now very familiar with. As part of that, he obviously got introduced to a whole space community that he wasn't familiar with previously, and set up DIY Rockets, which I think is a great business title. If you're going to be Ron Seal about it, call your business DIY Rockets. So he develops an open source 3D printed rocket engine that you could download as a free file, just for fun. Really, this was just an engagement and kind of fun activity. But it got him thinking, and he got into a community that he wasn't kind of familiar with previously. And from that, he recognised a couple of things. And Diego's quite a visionary thinker, and he was thinking, okay, this is fine, we're on this planet at the moment, but actually at some point, we are going to be a multi-planetary society. We will live all over the place. We may just be floating around, who knows. But there are going to be different ways that we need to therefore transact with each other. We're going to need some sort of space currency. So whether that's sparked his interest in blockchain and Bitcoin, and some sort of cryptocurrency was needed, some sort of space currency. He also recognised, and this was 15 years ago, by the way, this was 2015, he was having these, 9 years ago, 2015 he was having these thoughts. Edge computing, obviously the way to go. There is a CubeSat standard I talked about. There's also an equivalent on the software side of things, CCSDS, which is effectively a way of spacecraft talking to each other, which has kind of created, if I put it in very simple terms, kind of like a space internet. So CCSDS is sort of the only time really we can see anything layered on top of what we recognise as the web. So if you've got that sort of technology and you've got abundant power coming from the sun and you need to do things, you're going to need to communicate between people, between devices, machines, planets, whatever. You're going to need some sort of distributed compute system. And so he was thinking, well, distributed AI would probably be the way to speed that up. And I'm going to be doing this in space. So I'll create Space AI, which is the company that he created in 2015. His vision with that was therefore to be the largest distributed computer in the galaxy. And that's a nice, bold ambition. Others are also positioning themselves in a similar space. But actually, he realised that as part of that, you need a physical layer. You need something to hold this sort of compute on. So he's developed a NEO, a node. It's effectively a little PCB, picosatellite. This PCB is 5 centimetres by 5 centimetres. And you kind of go, well, that's a PCB that'll go in a satellite. No, that's pretty much the satellite. That's all you need. So these things are tiny. And depending on how you build those nodes up, those nodes can communicate between Earth and space, space to space. We could all go home this afternoon and say, well, I've got compute power at home, or I'm university, I can ship this compute power in, and you can create a node network and a mesh that actually then has got serious power. And if you build these nodes up, you can start with something really basic and cheap, which might just give a robotics function the ability to navigate on Earth. So they're using this in oil and gas and underground systems at the moment. You might put another node or another board on there, and it gives you the option to then compute and store and do comms. And you put another board on that, that might give you the AI functionality that this company is interested in. What I find interesting is then when you put that together, it still fits in the size of your hand. And if you look at where that might have an application, to give you a feel, whilst we may not see it day to day, there are 254 missions already in progress with some sort of lunar link. And there's a lot of tech being sent up and involved in that lunar landscape that does not have any AI function. So you could effectively see this as a bolt-on and a retrofit. Pan forward, that first node was launched into space in 2021. The second one is going up shortly. But they're talking now to the International Space Station about how can we give some more AI compute capability to what's basically quite an old piece of infrastructure, but also for people that this isn't their thing and they want to send other things up. Maybe just bolt this on the side of something that's pretty mundane and pretty straightforward so that they don't have to worry about it. So in terms of getting involved in that, I think there's opportunities there for this sort of tech going forwards. I just want to finish on an example from the flip side of that coin, which is not somebody that's operating necessarily as a software or kind of deep tech business, but a hardware developer who really hasn't set out necessarily to go into space, but has, through some of the work that we've been doing together, ended up in that space.
So my name's John Hurrell, I'm the Managing Director of Selectronics based in Falmouth, Cornwall. We do contract electronics manufacturing for a variety of sectors, which includes space, aerospace and medical. Selectronics has several different clients in space. We manufacture PCBs and assemble PCBs into a gyro product that's made its way onto some low Earth satellites. We also do some electronic switching for another satellite company as well, and we're in discussions with various other customers on projects that will end up in space. So we joined the Cornwall Space Cluster several years ago because we saw it as an opportunity to get into a new sector that we hadn't historically been involved in, and the relationship with James and Gail has enabled us to start making progress in this sector. Cornwall Space Cluster has been very valuable to us as a company. It's allowed us to network with other businesses within Cornwall on space. It's also allowed us to be introduced to companies outside of Cornwall that might be interested in investing in companies or sourcing in companies in Cornwall. And it's also helped us with various pieces of funding in order to get accreditations to be able to supply into the sector as well.
So hopefully that's reinforced the messages that we've heard today, which is about communities. We are building communities. We are trying to foster those relationships and conversations. If you do want to follow this conversation up, from my perspective, I'll be around for the rest of the day. Come and grab me over a coffee. You can sign up to our newsletter, which will kind of keep you up to date with what's happening and also advertises our events. And if you want to come and talk to some people, we've got our next quarterly networking event next Thursday up at the Spaceport. So if anyone wants to be involved in that, come and let me know and I'll share the Eventbrite links for you. Otherwise, thank you very much.